UN climate talks ended on Saturday with a deal that for the first time targeted fossil fuels as the key driver of global warming. That's looking at it glass half full. Some are calling it a breakthrough. But activist Greta Thunberg, unconvinced, called it blah, 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 while others say it's just the first step. How substantial is the language of the deal? Joining us this morning to give us his scorecard of the just concluded summit, Toru Kubo, the director of the Asian Development Bank's Energy Division for Southeast Asia. Toru, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so what happened over the weekend, it depends how you're going to look at it. Glass half full, glass half empty. Before we get to your view of what actually happened, what 2 weeks of talks actually achieved, let's take a listen to what the COP26 president had to say at the closing. Let's listen to this.
May I just say to all delegates, I apologize for the way this process has unfolded, and I'm deeply sorry. I also understand the deep disappointment. But I think, as you have noted, it's also vital that we protect this package.
So, Toru, what are your key takeaways from the COP26 summit, especially from someone like you, who's very much involved in funding various big-ticket projects for many countries around the world?
Yeah, sure. That was quite a powerful video. It's always very emotional at the end of COPs. I think I've been to about 10 COPs in total. And this one was really special. I was there for the first 4 days. There were many pledges made. There is progress. I think I want to emphasize that point. This is the first time that coal was mentioned in any of the UN documents. So that in itself is progress. It was a very last minute change. Not all delegates, there was not enough time for all delegates to be fully consulted, but it's always a compromise because the UN process requires a consensus of everybody. So there are trade-offs, and at the end, everyone is equally happy, equally unhappy. Overall, I would say that there's progress on the fossil fuel front. There was disappointment on climate finance, pledges being made more than 10 years ago, not yet being made, but there was a pledge of the developed countries to catch up on that and fulfill their pledges on a cumulative basis. There were very encouraging signs made on nature-based solutions. There was a pledge by multiple countries to stop deforestation. There was also a process agreed on adaptation finance. And then the biggest development in the context of market is that finally there were the rules on how to implement the next phase of carbon markets agreed. And that is really significant. There will be business opportunities coming up. There was a Reuters report that came up saying that it could be trillions of dollars that could be unleashed in the business sector going forward.
Speaking of funding and programs, I know that the ADB just launched the Climate Action Catalyst Fund. The funding for that was upgraded to $100 billion. I know that this was originally set up for the COP25 in Madrid, correct? Tor, I'm very curious, what were some of the groundbreaking projects funded by this initiative in the first run that you think stand out and make the case for even more funding?
Yeah, the new carbon fund that was announced in COP25 that we will be working on it, and we promised to launch it by COP26. So we're very happy that we got to launch it by COP26. There are initial pledges made. It's the third carbon fund that we have. The first one was under the Kyoto Protocol, and the second one was the post-Kyoto Protocol. In ADB, what we do is we use the carbon funds to support sustainable development projects. A couple of projects, for example, waste management projects in South Asia, India and Bangladesh. We have renewable energy projects, for example, in Bhutan and China, Indonesia, Thailand. And these projects not only reduce emission reductions, greenhouse gas emissions, but also contribute to development of those communities. That's where the carbon finance payment is going. So in the UN system, it's called the Sustainable Development Mechanism. And that's what ADB really aspires to do. Let's not just work on emission reductions, but make sure that it functions for positive development.
Toru, in the context of what happened in COP26, how substantial is the deal or the commitment, you think, for countries like the Philippines? The Philippines has already committed a 75% reduction in avoidance in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, even if we just contribute 0.33% of global greenhouse gases.
Yes, that's right. Philippines is not a big contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions. And just to clarify, that reduction target is from a baseline trend, so it's not absolute reductions. There is a business as usual growth path, and what is the reduction from that path? It's there's very convincing and encouraging leadership from the authorities in the Philippines that Philippines is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change impacts. And unfortunately, that's the reality and dilemma of this global issue, because even though Philippines and other countries, they're not the major contributor to the global warming side and the changes in the climate, they are the most vulnerable, and therefore they need to also show that the efforts are being made and bring the big emitters on board. Also, that's not the only side. It's really the business opportunities. You know, the Philippines, along with other countries, is not the most endowed with the energy resources except for renewable energy. There's so much potential out there, especially Philippines. There's so much geothermal potential and solar, offshore wind. These will be cost effective in the mid to long term. So the question is, how do we develop those in an affordable, reliable way and help Philippines become more energy independent? Then the country will be less vulnerable to the sorts of price shocks that are happening today.
But, you know, in this country, we also have major companies, big conglomerates who are still into coal, who are still generating energy from coal. Through 2-3 years ago, I heard an executive from a renewable company say that these coal investments are stranded investments. They're going nowhere. Do you echo that sentiment, Toru?
Very critical question. There are discussions about stranded asset globally, and in Europe and the US, for example, they are becoming stranded quicker than most people anticipated. In the Philippines, 90% of power is still traded bilaterally. There is a wholesale market, but only 10% of the power is there. In other neighbor countries and other developing countries, the market forces are not working in a way that they'll be stranded in the short term. So to some extent, they will be protected by the power purchase agreements, but that's not going to last for a long time once they have to go into competition in the wholesale market.
Okay, thank you for putting that in perspective, Toru. Let's go back to what ADB is doing in the energy space. I know that you guys are putting in place a coal retirement mechanism. You did present this at the COP26. Could you give us the lowdown on the details on this? I know you're doing this in Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam. There's a $2.5 to $3.5 billion fund to buy out these coal projects and turn them into renewables. But there are concerns, Toru, that this is not necessarily going to shorten the lifespan of these coal projects and may even lengthen them. What do you say to that?
Well, Michelle, thank you very much for raising that. We had a launch of a partnership with Secretary Dominguez from the Philippines and Minister Sri Mulyani, the finance minister from Indonesia, and ADB president. We're very excited about this. It is exactly because we will not get to the Paris Agreement targets of 1.5 degrees, which is critical for so many countries, including the Philippines, to stop dangerous climate change without addressing existing coal. Just to give a context, I don't want to sound too geeky with numbers, but the global CO2 emissions is 40 gigatons, 40 billion tons per year. 10 gigatons, 25% of that comes from existing coal power plants.
Mhm.
And so if we don't really try to tackle and accelerate early retirement or repurposing, and just to clarify, Michelle, it's not coal that's the problem, it's the greenhouse gas emissions from coal that is a problem. So in the UNFCCC language that was just agreed, it says unabated coal. As long as we can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from coal, that's a repurposing, or replace them, retire them early and replace them with clean energy, we are contributing to the problem. And if we're not shortening the lifetime in a meaningful degree, then there's no point of doing this. It is very early. I just want to clarify that it's not launching that 2.5 billion to 3.5 billion fund. We launched a partnership to undertake a robust feasibility study that just started about a month ago. And we have a consortium working on it. And we will be having a series of consultations with the government, the market players, the businesses, the utility, and civil society, so that we're addressing all angles and it's contributing to reliable, affordable, and clean energy. Now, we will make that decision with the government and other key stakeholders around the first half of next year.
Okay. You did mention shortening the lifespan of these coal investments, or the greenhouse gas guzzlers. What do you mean by meaningful shorten?
We are
What is meaningful?
Sure, Michelle. We are targeting a minimum of 10 years reduction of operations from a business as usual. Now, there's discussion on business as usual. Normally in Asian developing countries, coal plants run for 50 years, 45 to 55 years. Now, people are saying because of this global movement, that should be shorter, it should be 40 years. If we can reduce that to 30 years, the maximum, that would be meaningful. On average, we do want to reduce by 15 years. That's a target that we have. On average, across a large coal power plant fleet, we want to reduce, shorten by 15 years.
Okay, Toru, final question. You know, all of these developments are happening against the backdrop of COVID-19. How did the pandemic, if at all, you know, change the direction, change the view, change the timelines for this climate change initiative for the bank, for ADB?
For ADB, we've stayed on track. We've provided significant support to COVID response. As you are well aware, we provided support for the procurement of vaccines. One of the first batches of vaccines in the Philippines, we were very happy to support the government in bringing those to the countries and across Asia Pacific. But at the same time, we cannot lose focus on the mid to long-term issues that are just as pressing, and it will have significant impact on the people. So we have kept our focus. And that's why we've been developing the energy transition mechanism and other support for adaptation mitigation throughout this whole pandemic.
Wow, very, very busy months ahead for you guys. Thank you for the work that you do. And thank you, Toru, for the time this morning and the insights. Hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you so much, Michelle.